Hi everyone. With the final project now here, can't believe it's already over. I felt like I've learned so much through this class. It's taught me, when I reflect back, it taught me how to use the things that I've been already doing with my L's and to make it even greater, and taught me some new strategies and new techniques. The videos that we watched, as well as the books that we had to read, I felt were really beneficial to my teaching practices, and I hope to include it in the class. So I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed our class and chatting with everyone and getting feedback from you and the professor. So I've created a little slideshow. My focus statement that I decided was very important was that I felt there was a real need for the accommodation for L's to be appropriate and consistent. So when we have accommodations, different things that we do to help L's, I felt that there were two aspects that, at least in my school and what I've seen, really needed to be worked on, and that was it being appropriate to them and also being consistent. So we're going to go take a little journey through that. So that's my first slide. So I connected to my teaching first. I just finished my first year teaching in New York City School District, work in Flushing, and I taught 5th grade, ELA only, so it was a bit of a challenge because obviously English language arts is not their favorite subject. I had a lot of kids from China who ranged from speaking absolutely no English to speaking a lot of English. So with that, I felt that being consistent with the different strategies that I used and what I expected of them was very important, as well as, like I said in my focus statement, that they need to be appropriate. So I wouldn't do the same thing for my beginner L's that I would for my, or entering, I should say, those who are the advanced. So after thinking about my own school and teaching, I felt it was important to focus on the needs for appropriate and consistent accommodations for L's. This is something I learned is very important for successful learning from teaching L's, and I expanded on this understanding through this course, which I really did enjoy. This primarily is done through different strategies that help to make these accommodations possible. So when we think about accommodations, we think sometimes primarily about just what we give to them on a test to make sure that they can be successful, but it's really in the everyday practices, the strategies we use, that we're always accommodating for these L's, and really tailoring it to their own needs, their specific needs, is very important. So what does appropriate accommodations mean? So when I say an accommodation has to be appropriate, I'm really focusing on for it to be fitting the needs of the child. So I'm really big on differentiating, and I think that's where this kind of comes in, that you need to accommodate for each of your L's, because even though you might have two kids who are just entering level, one might need something more than another. I had kids that were from India, and I also had kids from China, and I felt that those who were from China actually needed more support than those from India. The ones from India had a little more of a basis of English, so even though they might have been on the same level, according to the L standards and the ESL levels, they really needed different things. So for an L, having appropriate accommodations means also looking at the different criteria, like I just mentioned, seeing who had more English, who had less English, who had more verbal or written communication. Accommodations are appropriate if. So I kind of left this open to talk about what I felt like it meant to have an appropriate accommodation. It is geared specifically towards a student's language proficiency. So depending on the level, and I believe that even though a child or multiple children might be on the same level, you have to look at their specific language proficiency. How are they in the beginning stages of the entering level, or are they towards the end, almost ready to go to the next level? We would not give the same strategies and accommodations to an entering level L as we would a commanding L, which is very true, because somebody who's at the commanding level has a lot more knowledge of the English language than somebody who is just entering the classroom. I know in our videos we saw a lot of variation sometimes. Some of those classes that we looked at had kids who spoke English well, and some who you could tell had to really think about it and to see where they are. I think helps us as teachers to drive our instruction and to see what kind of accommodations we need to make to help them be successful. So what does that look like? So I wanted to quote Reese, which was from one of our books. It was from this book. So according to Reese, one strategy to accommodate Elle's instruction is to end each lesson with an oral and written review. So we really liked that one. Reviewing what you did kind of solidifies, I feel, for the children what you have taught them. So in being appropriate to your specific L's according to their language proficiency, I said for an entering L, you may want to have him just verbally tell you 2 words that they want to remember. That might be the extent of their review that they're capable and comfortable sharing with you at the end of the lesson, that they're able to master and do on their own. And that's fine, because then you might have a commanding L, and the appropriate thing you can ask of them might be to have them first say 3 facts they learned, 2 words they want to remember, and 1 thing that they found interesting. So that takes it to the next level, and that's appropriate for a commanding L. After, they would be asked to write it down, so that brings in the written review, and that would cover both oral and written. Accommodations are appropriate if. So another way I felt that you would maybe try to see if your accommodations are appropriate, and one way that there was really a need for this, at least in my classroom, I felt was there are strategies that reinforce the student's strengths. So some strategies might help them to reinforce and keep going and keep getting stronger and stronger in that one area, but that also assists with their weaknesses. You want, for an appropriate strategy, an appropriate accommodation, to help and reinforce what they've already mastered, but also help where they are weak. So for an entering child, they may need strategies that cover all the bases, both your listening, speaking, reading, and writing. But a developing L, which is just above that, they may need to strengthen his or her reading skills. Maybe they have a good basis of reading skills, but they need to keep strengthening that, but they also really need to focus on their writing skills. So an appropriate strategy, I felt, would help both sides. So what does this look like? For accommodations to be appropriate, they need to help the L to strengthen what they already know how to do well so they can continue to do it well, but also support in what they struggle with, like I had mentioned before. For an entering L, they may need to start at the basis with oral language games, songs, and poems to practice and get used to using the oral language. So according to Yatvin, that was another book that I enjoyed reading. That was one of their her suggestions, that when they're at that level, at low level, they might want to practice with songs, whereas a developing L may benefit from the role playing and creating their own short sentences, very short sentences that they're able to produce and act it out. So that brings in language, that brings in writing, a few different things. So it's strengthening what they know and helping with what they need help in. Accommodations need to be consistent. This is something that I felt was a need in my school. Unfortunately, people get busy and things, and we, as teachers, always need to remember to be consistent. That's something that I kind of am hoping my focus will be for next year too, is that any accommodations I make for my students, I make sure they're consistent. If I ask them to write and I tell them to use a glossary, I want to make sure that I always have them use that same thing over and over again, because I want them to know that until they master that, it needs to be consistent, and that they need to know that that's a resource that they should be using. So for accommodations strategies to be effective in the classroom, not only do they have to be appropriate for that child, but it is the teacher's job to make sure it is consistent. What does consistency of accommodations look like? To have accommodations that work well and support the success of students, they need to be done consistently. For an entering L, this may mean consistently having her ask in English when she needs to use the bathroom to practice her oral speaking skills daily. So that might be a very small task, but that repeatedly done and consistently done, she knows what's expected of her, that if I need to use the restroom or maybe even to get a drink of water, that I need to say it in English. That will help with being consistent in the accommodation. So it's kind of, you're accommodating them by telling them that this is what's expected of them. For developing L, this may mean having him consistently write in a daily journal about any topic of their choosing to have him consistently practice his written English skills. And that was part of Module 3 video. They had children writing in a notebook and writing just a free write about their daily activities, I think it was. So I felt that that was another strategy that would kind of help, and if they're consistent with that, that will strengthen their need for maybe continued practice with their writing. This is also important for state test accommodations. I looked at, since I'm part of the city school district, the New York Department of Education test accommodations guidance sheet for both students and families, and according to that, one of the things they could do is use a glossary on the state test, not a dictionary. A glossary shows the direct translation. So if Apple is said one way in their language, it tells you that. It doesn't tell you the definition of the word, so they're not losing on if they need to explain the definition of a word, or it's asking about vocabulary. It just tells them the translation, which could help tremendously in their comprehension of a text. So as a child does test prep throughout the year, if let's say throughout the year you're doing test prep with your kids in your class, you want to consistently use the accommodation of the glossary so that they can really pick it up, and then maybe eventually they won't need to rely on it so heavily and so much, and just really maybe the more complex tier 3 words or tier 2 words they would need to use that for, but they won't need to use it for every little word. So with being consistent with your accommodations, it might eventually die down where they don't need that accommodation as much and heavily rely on it. So you want them to use their glossaries in their native language to practice and become familiar with one of the accommodations that they will be allowed to use on the state exams. That is the end of my PowerPoint. I learned so much. If we go back to my focus statement, so my focus statement for this video and this PowerPoint was that a real need I found within my district was that there's the accommodations for L's that we give them, whether it be a strategy, whether it be giving them a glossary, whatever it is, it needs to be appropriate, and then it also needs to be consistent. Thank you so much, and see you soon.